What is going on, everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Thank you for joining me for another replay battle. Today I've got a 2 versus 2 done in Igni Ferroque, which if you guys are not familiar with this mod, I did actually cover it a little while back, so I'm going to put a link to that video down in the description, and I'm going to stick a link to the mod down there as well. But for those of you not in the know, Igni Ferroque is a mod that overhauls the vanilla Medieval 2 multiplayer gameplay, and it really expands on the fairly simple system of counters that is present in vanilla. So if you guys are familiar with vanilla, if you played any of the multiplayer of the campaign, sword infantry counter spear infantry, spears counter cavalry, etc., etc. And cavalry sometimes there's like shock cavalry and there's melee cav and things like that. But Igni Ferroque takes that dynamic and expands it in a big way. So there's, I think, at least 5 different kinds of cavalry, all of which have a role in the battlefield. So your light cav armed with spears can actually trade really, really well with heavily armored shock cavalry units or melee cav units and things like that. Your melee cav often function a little bit like infantry, like shock infantry. They're a little bit more mobile and I think have a little bit more of a devastating charge. But in any case, without any further ado, let's get into the army comps and into the replay itself. I hope you guys enjoy it. The first army we're going to look at today is the forces of Portugal, being commanded by yours truly. I've brought 2 units of Pavy crossbows, who, despite being crossbows and despite more or less conventional wisdom across medieval mods and Total War games, the crossbows actually, when they're elite crossbows, they have a range that matches that of bowmen. Not longbows, however. Longbows do have a particular advantage of having both AP missiles and a longer range, and then pretty well any unique or elite crossbow unit in the game. But yeah, these crossbows here are deceptively long range, so if you think that you're going to be able to outrange them just by bringing bowmen, think again, because you won't. But yes, I've got 2 units of them. I've also got some Portuguese arquebusiers, who are, from what I understand, very good at dealing with unarmored larger targets, like large units of hordes, for example. So they're good against Russia and their Sadovian tribesmen come to mind, and Aztec faction, the Aztec faction, pretty well across the board. The arquebusiers are very useful against them indeed. I've also got some musketeers, who are some long-range fire support. I believe these are the longest-range, highest armor-piercing damage rifles that you can bring in this mod, but they do have, I believe, a much slower rate of fire, and they fire by rank and rather than like the entire unit or something like that. I've also got a first line composed of 2 units of male Lusitanian infantry, who are spearmen, and I've got 1 unit of the regular Lusitanian spearmen as well. Now, from what I understand, Portugal is meant to be a faction that fields multiple lines of infantry. So if you are looking for a powerhouse unit in melee for Portugal, you will not find it because they do not have one. I was a little bit disappointed with how well their infantry performed, but I think they make up for it a little bit with a lot of skirmishing firepower, both at long range and in the mid-range. So there is kind of a trade-off to it, but if you're looking for a well-rounded faction that's going to be able to field some heavy infantry, you may want to look elsewhere other than Portugal. That being said, I've got 2 units of heavy infantry here, 2 units of dismounted Portuguese knights. And these guys are AP, really high damage shock infantry. They've also got 2 HP, so they're a little bit more resilient to missile fire and just damage generally than you would normally expect from these units, seeing them in Medieval 2. Like regular vanilla Medieval 2. So they've got about half the numbers of your regular Portuguese knights in Medieval 2, but they have the extra 2 HP, so it kind of ends up working out nicely. They're not super expensive, but do not expect these guys to hold a battle line all by themselves. You're going to need to mix them in with some of Portugal's other infantry options, sparse though they may be. Moving on now to my cavalry, I've got 1 unit of mounted sword knights, who for all intents and purposes are just another infantry unit. Think of them a little bit like dragoons. They don't dismount, but they are very comfortable in melee. They're good against infantry and good against other melee cavalry as well. Although if they go up against any cavalry that's spear armed, these guys are going to die. They're going to die like dogs, so be aware. I've also got a unit of Portuguese knights, heavy shock cavalry, as you would expect from these guys. Very dangerous on the charge, and yeah, on not much else. I've also brought a unit of Iberian Cav. This is spear cavalry, just a nice little cost-effective unit that will trade nicely with other heavy cavalry, like the French, for example, who I'll be fighting predominantly in this battle. I've also brought 1 unit of male Lusitanian cavalry, they're the mounted counterparts to the Lusitanian infantry. These guys have javelins and they do a lot of damage with them. They're reasonably fast-moving as well. Now, I don't know if I mentioned my 2 units of male Lusitanian infantry or not. Maybe I skipped over them, but I will say that these guys have a really vicious javelin volley. That being said, javelins and missiles in general don't seem to fire in the same kind of volleys, I think, that we're used to in Medieval 2. The damage seems to trickle in, so it does a lot, but it does it more over time rather than just bam up front like you would with a volley of arrows or a volley of javelins in other mods like Third Age, for example. And I don't know, maybe I'm just seeing things, I don't know. But I think that if that is the case, that's probably something intentionally done by the designers to maybe to improve the pacing of battle a little bit. So, not too sure, that's just something that I've personally noticed while playing this mod. I've also brought 1 unit of Culverin, which from what I've been told, a Culverin is a more accurate, more damaging version of a cannon that costs a little bit more. So if you're on a bit of a shoestring budget, then you may want to bring a cannon over a Culverin, but I had the money, so I thought I would bring one. And now, last but certainly not least, this is going to prove to be one of the most important units in this game. I have my General's Bodyguard. Now, there's many different kinds of General's Bodyguards in Igni Ferroque. You can customize them basically pretty well according to what you need. So this happens to be a light skirmish unit that does not have a lot of members in it, so I've only got 11, and it only cost me 500 to bring, which means I can spend money elsewhere in my army. But there are very deadly, very numerous, and heavily armed and armored heavy cavalry units that you can use for a General's Bodyguard. There's also some really strong dismounted bodyguards that factions like Russia get, for example, like the Schlechta Bodyguard, friggin' strong, and they've got decent numbers to boot. But in any case, I think that does it. Oh no, actually, you know what? I missed one. Where did I put them? Ah, my Portuguese cuirassiers. And they are around here somewhere. Yes, here they are. These guys are like really close range, really slowly moving skirmish cavalry. They've got these rifles here that fire, it's like a scatter shot, sort of, it's like buckshot basically. Really useful for dealing with large numbers of unarmored units. Very similar to the arquebusier, they're just a little bit more durable with their 3 HP and high armor, and they're a little bit more mobile. Although they are not too much more mobile, they're actually quite slow. So moving on now to my ally, I was lucky enough to get to play this with the creator of this mod. I think it's a one-man development team, but Alexei's really done some great work pretty well on his own. Now this is Alexei Mazzaro, who's going to be playing as the Venice faction, Venice. He's got 3 units of mounted sergeants who are spear-armed cavalry. He's also got, where are they, 2 units of Stratiots, who are also spear cavalry. I think they're a little bit less armored than the mounted sergeants, but they look cool. They look like witch hunters from Warhammer Fantasy, which I personally really enjoy. He's also got a Shock General's Bodyguard. Again, this is another like budget version. They are multiple HP, but they only have 11 men in them, so they're very easy to kill. Mishaps like fire from cannon, for example, will destroy this bodyguard very, very fast, so you need to be careful with how you use them. But again, they only cost about 500 gold, so he was able to bring a lot of stuff in exchange for that. And that's one of the things I like about Igni Ferroque. You have a lot of options. You are able to build armies around all kinds of different stuff. I really think it makes for an interesting meta. But in any case, moving on. We'll get into that at the end of the video. He's brought a Revolt, which is a long-range artillery piece, which gives... I think it's kind of like a machine gun. I don't know. It fires out of those like 9 barrels that it has there, and it can do some serious damage to lightly armored infantry. I don't know how well it does against armor, however. Now, Alexei's also brought a unit of cavalry militia, who are deceptively cool looking. They look great, but they're not amazing. However, you need to use these guys for like a suicide mission, or to maybe trade a little bit cost efficiently with other more expensive cavalry. These guys can do the job in a pinch. Don't expect them to last very long, though. They are militia, so they do break quite quickly and frequently. Now over here we got some Broken Lances. If you guys are familiar with vanilla Medieval 2, the Broken Lances are not a new unit, but they're actually good in this. So these are multiple HP shock cavalry, and they can do some serious work. But again, shock cavalry, you want to keep them constantly on the go and watch out for more inexpensive spear cavalry. Even if it's light cavalry, it can counter these guys quite effectively. But the Broken Lance is definitely worth it in this particular mod. Now, moving on to his main line, he's got, I believe, 2 units of the Mailed Wardens, who are anti-infantry mercenary troops. Now, a little note about mercenaries here. They can be used to fill in gaps in a roster, but they are a little bit less, I should say, cost efficient, and then other units that do the same thing. So for example, if you have some mercenary axemen and some axemen from Norway, for example, who get those as part of their mainline roster, the Norwegian axes are going to be more efficient for what it costs to bring them. So the mercenaries are a little bit more expensive, and I think their morale is just a little bit lower. But units in this generally have high morale, so unless you're using like gunpowder units to break morale, then generally your units will stick around and fight for quite a while. But yeah, that's what mercenaries are for. I believe he's also got 4 or 5 units of these dismounted men-at-arms who are really, really sturdy. These guys have multiple HP, high defense, all right attack values. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere. I can't just give them everything. And yes, they make a very, very firm front line that is not easy to break. Now over here we have 1 unit of mercenary Italian spearmen who are so good against cavalry. One of the things that I've noticed in Reforged is that spear units, really, even elite spear units, can really struggle to bring down heavy cavalry. That is not the case in this mod. Spearmen are a danger to your cavalry, and you need to be aware of that, otherwise you will lose your expensive cavalry units very quickly. Now over here we got a couple units of Venetian crossbows, armed as late period Italian foot soldiers, though they have this weird, yeah, they've got this sallet here, which is actually, like, from the looks of it, it's a German sallet, but in any case, these crossbows are really, really good. I think they're elite crossbows, so they've got some decent range on them, and yeah, you don't really need to bring too many of these guys to be effective. They are quite heavily armored as well, so they'll stand up to missile fire reasonably well. Here we got some arquebusiers, who are, well, they're exactly what I explained earlier. Good for dealing with crowds. Think of them as riot police in a certain sort of fashion, I suppose. And he's got another unit of them right here, so he's got a couple units of those. Now, I think that does it for myself and my teammates, so let's go ahead and let's see what our opponents have brought to the battle today. Across the field, we have the combined forces of France and Russia, a pair of fairly unlikely allies. The French army is being commanded by Wislac. I believe he's got 2 units of mounted sergeants who are light spear cavalry, good at trading very effectively with heavy cavalry units, or just cavalry in general, really. Wislac's also got, I believe, 1 unit of lancers who are very similar to the broken lances in that they are heavy shot cavalry with 2 HP, but you want to get them on the charge because their melee damage is a little bit lackluster. So they are a very specialized unit, and you need to use them according to their strengths. Now over here we got a couple units of gendarmes who are not bad. They're similar unit to, actually they're almost identical aside from the horses, to the lancers over there, except these guys lack 2 HP, and I'm not too sure about what their melee stats are, but I believe that they're also quite low as well, so you want to keep these guys constantly moving and on the charge in order to get as much value out of them as possible. Moving on to his main line, which from what I can tell is really what France does effectively. They've got some decent heavy cavalry and some pretty strong mainline infantry as well. We got 2 units of mercenary Frankish spearmen, 1 here, 1 I believe on the other flank. We've also got 6 units of dismounted feudal knights. These guys are very cost effective, about 570 to bring. I think they've got like 13 damage and 21 defense, so they can trade really, really well with other even elite heavy infantry, and these guys can be brought in large numbers, which is what you're seeing here today. So we've also got a unit of Flemish mercenary pikes who are mixed in there. They're just kind of like hiding behind their heavily armored brothers. I think that's really funny. They're playing a little bit of peekaboo with us right there. Moving on to his skirmish line, we've got a unit of a Scots Guard. These guys are longbows. As I mentioned earlier, they, I believe they have AP missiles, and they have really long range that outstrips just about any other skirmisher in the game besides artillery. These guys have 2 HP as well, and they're quite well armored, so they will stand up in a missile fight for quite a while. Now over here we have 2 units of French longbowmen, again long-range AP missiles, but they don't have the defense of, say, a Pavie crossbow or other skirmishing units, so massed volley fire can bring these guys down pretty well in a few moments. Now over here we got a unit of arquebusiers, who at this point I'm sure you guys know exactly what they do, and behind the main line of feudal knights we've got a unit of mercenary javelin men, who I think France lacks pretty well in their entirety. From what I've seen of the French roster, they do not really have any javelin units to speak of. They've got a lot of good heavy infantry and some good like spear units like Volgias and things like that, but they do not have any jav. So this is there to fill in a little bit of a gap in that roster, and I assume it's just a little bit of leftover money on the part of Wislac. Now he's also got an artillery piece over here. Got a basilisk, which it looks a lot heavier than my cannons, but I think this is really intended for taking out other artillery pieces, but I could be wrong about that. I don't know a whole lot about this mod. I'm still learning things, so I will pass information on to you as I receive it, and I'll try to make sure it's accurate, but I will make mistakes sometimes. Moving on now to the forces of Russia, being commanded by Rules, a good friend of mine. He's got a couple units of Kievan Rus Reavers. These guys are pretty... I would say that they are efficient. That's really what these guys seem to be about. They're quite fast, and those wicked-looking spears that they've got there are quite good at taking down other cavalry units. There's not a whole lot of them, though, so it is easy to get these guys focused down, but not so easy to isolate them so that it's really a big downfall. Just don't be foolish with them, and they can do pretty decent against other cavalrymen. Now, over here, I believe we have 3 units of Noble Axemen, Russia being really known for its effective anti-armor infantry line. These guys have 2 HP, and they're pretty expensive, so if you want to bring 3 of them, it's gonna cost you, but the Noble Axemen will definitely pay for themselves if you use them well. Rules is also bringing a couple units of crossbow militia, 1 unit of arquebusiers. He's also got a unit of dismounted boyar sons, who are a javelin unit, but a heavily armed and armored one with 2 HP, so it's not easy to kill these guys, and afterwards they're fairly decent infantry as well. His cavalry arm... Oh no, we got a little bit more infantry here. We got a couple units of dismounted Druzhina, but his cavalry arm consists of again, the 2 units of Kievan Rus Reavers and a single unit of Jav Cav militia, by the way, and this, the pride and joy of the Russian cavalry force. These are the Tsar's Guard, spear-armed, heavily armed cataphracts with 2 HP. These guys are everything you could ever want when it comes to taking down other heavy cavalry. I don't think there's too many cavalry in the game that can stand up to these guys. The Tsar's Guard have good numbers, good damage, and all around are just a really solid unit. Now moving on to his front line, this is composed of, I believe, 5 units of Sidovian tribesmen who sacrifice their heavy armor for mobility, and they also have a really good... I think they have a pretty decent charge bonus, but they've got strong AP damage in melee. I think they've got about 13 damage, so they can be very effective against heavily armored foes, like, say, the Feudal Knights over there, for example, or pretty well anything on Venice's main line. So yeah, this is definitely a danger for my ally. Not as much for me, because I don't think the Portuguese units are really as well armored, so a lot of that AP bonus kind of goes to waste a little bit against them, but against my ally, these guys are definitely something to bring. Now, I think... No, actually we've got a single bodyguard unit here. This is the Schlechta bodyguard that I mentioned earlier. 3 HP, a lot of damage, and of course, AP, because they got those big ugly axes there. Great for hacking apart heavy infantry. Now, I think that just about does it for the army comp, so let's go ahead and let's jump into the replay. So after taking some marginal losses from Vislak's artillery pieces, my ally and I decided that we would pull back behind this little township here and use that as cover to avoid taking any more severe losses. More severe, I would say. We've only really lost a few things, but this is really the big loss here. I lost 4 of my general's bodyguard cavalrymen, so that really kind of sucked for me. Just about cut my general's bodyguard strength in half, so we decided we would pull back before we took any more severe casualties that we couldn't necessarily recover from. Now, actually, we've got a little bit of movement over here. This is when Rules kind of sent over a bit of a probing attack. You can see those Kievan Rus Reavers are moving in, kind of testing my defenses. So I moved up with a unit of Jav Cav here, which I was intending to pull out of combat, but unfortunately, the Kievan Rus Reavers, like I said, are very quick, and they managed to get in there and catch my Lusitanians. But my Lusitanians are actually doing really well. I think it's because a lot of them were tossing their javelins after the Kievan Rus Reavers charged into melee. So the Kievan Rus Reavers took really severe casualties in the early stages of that engagement, and it's actually allowing me to move in with my Iberian cavalry over here. These are anti-Cav, and I'm going to try and flank this unit. So Rules is moving in with some reinforcements, but seeing the local superiority of my Portuguese cavalry, he is going to decide, I think very wisely, to fall back with these Kievan Rus Reavers and regroup behind his lines with the rest of his army. Now, this one little unit, I should have chased them down. I should have done something to these guys, and you'll see why in a little bit. Now, I've got my Iberian cavalry giving chase. Those Kievan Rus Reavers are so fast, and I know that he's just going to pull them back once he started to reform. And if he kites me towards his line, well, he could do a lot of damage to me. He could catch me out, destroy my cavalry, and that would be a really ugly affair for me just to kill this little understrength unit here of Kievan Rus Reavers. So now at this point, my ally and I decided that that Venice wants to take on Russia. So we're actually going to switch wings here, and it's going to take me a little while to get my button gear. In the meantime, I'm firing with my Culverin straight through the streets here into Vislak's army, trying to claim the lives of some of his forces. Now, I don't think I've really been all that successful in that endeavor so far. I do have a straight shot at his Basilisk, however, which might be a worthwhile target. Now, this is where things get a little bit ugly. Now you can see these Kievan-Rus Reavers here moving into the township. Rule's thinking maybe he's going to hide them in there for a later date, but he does see a bit of a chink in my armor. Now as my army begins to shift and all my forces are out of position and just not able to support my Culverin on the front lines, Rules is going to jump on an opportunity here with his Kievan-Rus Reavers, and he's going to charge straight for my Culverin, and unfortunately we're just not going to be able to get in there and at the right time. Now my artillery crew took a big hit from Vislak's artillery, and then they got finished off by those Kievan-Rus Reavers. So that group of artillerymen is going to rout, and I'm going to lose a very expensive artillery piece. It's like 1,300 or so gold right there that didn't really manage to accomplish anything. So that's a big loss for me. Unfortunately, we got really unlucky. They might have been okay. They might have not routed if Vislak's artillery didn't hit at the same time pretty well that those Kievan-Rus Reavers charged into the rear of that cavalry. And maybe if Alexei's cavalry had arrived there a little bit sooner, he could have salvaged my Culverin, but unfortunately that was not the case, and now we're going to have to do without. So Alexei is moving up with his cavalry first here, going to consolidate his position and prevent any more sneaky attacks from Rules from coming his way while he forms up his army behind the protective screen of his horsemen. Now in the back here, I've got a little bit of my cavalry on the side of my ally, just because we want to kind of balance our deployment. I don't want to bring my whole force necessarily over to the other end, because that will completely isolate my ally, which could potentially result in a double team and the collapsing of our right flank. So we've got to be careful about that. So I'm going to leave a little bit of support there, just in case. You never know. The loss of my artillery definitely made me a little bit more cautious in this game, because yeah, things can happen pretty quickly. Now, if we move in here to the center, in this little township, you can see quite a lot of Russian infantry has actually moved in here and are presenting a menace to the Venetian left flank, rather, should they decide they want to move up and face the Russians in a full-on battle. So this is going to be a problem. Alexei Mazzaro, I'm sure, is going to react accordingly. You can see some of his Venetian crossbowmen in the back here forming up, getting themselves onto that left flank, and they're going to be able to put some decent fire into those dismounted Druzhina. Now, if we go ahead and look over on this side, you can see that there's quite a lot of French cavalry over here as well. One of the things that Rules really lacks is a cavalry contingent that is able to take on that of the Venetians. There's a lot of spear-armed cavalry there that can do a ton of damage to Rules' forces, and they'll be easily able to overwhelm his cavalry. So Vislak has moved in to try and prevent that from happening. Now, this is what I was talking about before. You can send these guys on suicide missions and have it be a glorious, very cost-efficient affair for your side. Now you can see those cavalry militia charging into the front of those arquebusiers, getting a decent amount of kills on them, actually killing quite a lot, taking down some of the crossbowmen as well, before they are ultimately overwhelmed and forced to flee. Now most of that unit is going to die, so unfortunately I don't think we're going to see them reform. They are militia. They've only got the heart for really maybe 1 or 2 charges before they die off anyway. So I would say that killing the amount of arquebusiers that he did definitely got his money's worth out of that unit of cavalry militia. Now, actually, the arquebusiers are opening fire on those guys, using a little bit of their ammo, so in this case, it's all about being cost-effective and trading things with your enemies that they wouldn't necessarily want to trade for things that are a lot cheaper and less effective. Now, if we move over to this end, yes, you can see the Druzhina now in full retreat, falling back to the center of this township to hide themselves from those Venetian crossbows, who are reaping a bloody, bloody harvest amongst the ranks of these Russian warriors. Now, hold on, let's slow this down just a little bit here so we don't miss anything. I want to talk a little bit about this township, because it's one of the things that I really like on this map that makes it a lot more interesting and a little bit different from your standard line battle. Now, most of the time when people are fighting on this kind of map, they're going to go around one of the sides. Obviously, that's where your army is going to be the most effective. So you're not just going to sit there and like form up your forces facing a bunch of buildings because they can't really do a whole lot there. So the fact that you've got multiple lanes here that you can use, both on this side and actually no, just on this side it's just one lane, so it's a little bit less useful for blue team players, for players on this side to take advantage of. But over on this end, it does offer some lanes of attack for the for players that are able to take advantage of them, and this can be potentially used to like break a line or to overwhelm attackers. Occupy the front line with your main forces, and then throw your ambush forces into a flanking attack. It just makes it a lot more interesting. There's a lot more things to consider, I think, than you would have in your normal field battle, because these areas can be very easily locked down by forces in behind the line, like skirmishers, a unit of arquebusiers, and maybe some other skirmishers as well. Could cover these really nicely and scythe through any troops trying to move up through it. But naturally, that has consequences. You move forces away from the front line, and yeah, maybe they're not where you need them to be when you need them to be there. You use up ammo and things like that. So if attackers can push through here really quickly and overwhelm defenses, then they can have a really big effect. But if the defenders are on their toes and see it coming, then they can shut it down, and that has consequences elsewhere in the battle. Anyway, I wanted to talk about how much I like this map and these terrain features and how much they add to the dynamic of playing in these kinds of areas. But in any case, let's move on. Now you can see me moving forward here with my Portuguese forces. One of my big fears is that I've seen Vislac siphoning troops over onto this end. Look at this, he's got a lot of Scots Guard here. Actually, his entire skirmish line is moving over to this end. The noble axemen have now retreated over to this side, and I think that Vislac has also moved in some more cavalry units as well. Now, I'm on the other end of the town. I'm not able to help my ally at all. So if they want to double team him, they may be able to overwhelm him really quickly, and I don't want to have that happen. So just a quick note here. You can see some of Rules' Javcav militia being a bit of a pain in the butt for Alexei Mazzaro's mounted sergeants. Rules trying to soften up that cavalry line before himself and Vislac move in. Venice has so much cavalry that he can conceivably take on the cav of Vislac that he sent over, and Rules' entire contingent remaining to him as well. So Rules definitely wants to soften these guys up a little bit before he moves in. Now, those Javcav are just a total pain in the butt. You can see Alexei Mazzaro constantly moving around here, trying to keep these guys on their toes. A unit of Stratiets moving in now to chase those guys off, and Alexei Mazzaro is actually going to shift a unit of Venetian crossbows over here. They're going to be protected by his cavalry, and that's going to force those Javcav to retreat. They don't want to get anywhere near these crossbows. The crossbows definitely outrange their javelins, so that's basically put an end to that shenanigans right here. Unless Rules wants to lose those Javcav in droves, he's going to want to pull them back and get them away from those Venetian crossbows. Now if we move over onto the other end, Vislac is just constantly retreating here. He's trying to, I think he's trying to maybe buy time, allow them to get the rest of their forces into position so that they can launch a double team attack, a two-pronged attack or something like that on my ally. They basically just want to overwhelm the Venetians and then come in from behind me and sandwich me between their two armies. So you can see some feudal knights and mercenary Frankish spearmen over here. This is a really tall order for Venice to deal with on their own. But Lexi, he definitely knows what he's doing. He created the mod, so I'm sure he'll do very well for himself. Another retreat here from the dismounted feudal knights and the rest of Vislac's forces over here on the, we'll call them the red team, the red team's right flank. This is going to force me to go forward, and I'm just going to have to run it. I'm just going to have to hoof it over and try and deal with them. Now there is still the ever-present menace here of the dismounted Regina, and this is really working on the principle that I was talking about earlier, where if the attackers can move through here quickly and overwhelm my defenses, then it can potentially be a big problem, but you'll see what happens there. So I'm just going to go for it. I don't want them double-teaming my ally. I want to relieve some pressure off of my right wing, so I'm going to move in with my sword knights backed up with my Iberian cavalry, and that is going to be more than these gendarmes have bargained for. Over here, I got my Portuguese knights moving in against the gendarmes. That is going to be a pretty equal fight there. These two units can fight pretty well on equal grounds. I'm actually also going to move up with my cuirassiers to try and put a little bit of flanking fire into these guys. Not necessarily the best place for these cuirassiers. Freaking hell, that's hard to switch between English and French real quick like that. But in any case, it's not the best place for them to be. They're not really all that effective against armor, but they do have an effect on morale, so potentially they can be of use here in that regard alone. Now over here, my Iberian cavalry and my sword knights, they're doing all right. The gendarmes are really, I think, in a lot of trouble here. My Portuguese knights, supported by my cuirassiers, are a big problem. Now, Vislac tried to move in with his mercenary Jav, unit to try and put some fire into my flank there, but I was able to kill pretty well half the unit, a little bit over half the unit, with a charge from my Portuguese cuirassier. These guys, not really what they're intended for, but it can be a big problem. So over here you can see I've moved in with my crossbows, my Pavi crossbows, and I'm starting to put some enfilading fire into this unit of dismounted field knights to try and support my cavalry. But my cav definitely losing this fight. Vislak's going to pull back there with his gendarme, and I'm going to follow with my Iberian cav and my sword knights. I want to deny these guys the charge, because I know that they are shock cavalry, so if I just keep on top of them, I will be able to wipe them out. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit ugly. Vislak's got enough infantry to support his cavalry here with the Lancers. Their 2 HP is going to make all the difference against my Portuguese Knights, and I think that's basically all I have there is the Portuguese Knights, and he's got some Feudal Knights over there as well. Over on this end, he's moving in with another unit of Feudal Knights, flanking my Iberian Cav. I can see a unit of gendarmes here. One of the more depleted units is actually going to come in from the rear and attack my knights, which is going to rout my mounted sword contingent. My Iberian cavalry, nonetheless, undaunted, going to push forward against those gendarmes. And they're doing all right, but they also end up, I believe, getting routed. Now they are fighting to the death, so maybe they'll take some of those gendarmes with them. Now, over on this side, you can see some mounted sergeants. I think they managed to get a charge into my crossbows. I've got my male Lusitanian cavalry moving in to try and counter them, but honestly, they should be staying well away from these mounted sergeants. The mounted sergeants have more than enough chumps to take down those male Lusitanian cavalry, so I should be leveraging their missile damage at this point. Now I'm going to move up with my front line. I should have done this a while ago, but I was a little bit hesitant, and I think it is going to cost me a lot here. Now, my male Lusitanian infantry, they need to be firing into those Feudal Knights. They've got some devastating javelins, and actually you'll see the javelins in action here in just a second. Come on, toss it. You can see that they kind of just trickle in. They don't necessarily go in all at once, so it's not nearly as much shock damage. Now, they're beginning to fire into those Feudal Knights, maybe claiming a few of those gendarmes as well. But Vislak is now in the process of enveloping my main line. My Pavi crossbows getting hit a little bit by that charge. I'm going to pull them back, try and reform, and continue their firing. My front line really struggling right now against those Feudal Knights who have now actually broken through, flanking this unit of male Lusitanian spearmen, and defeat basically seems certain for them just about everywhere. But let's pop on over to the Russia and Venice fight. Things are looking surprisingly good for Venice, I have to say. The Sedovian tribesmen have really suffered quite heavily, a lot of that due to the missile fire from Venice. You can see those arquebusiers in the back there opening up on these lightly armored tribesmen. That is going to be a nightmare for them. Look at them die like crazy. It's also not going to do anything for their morale either, so they could potentially begin to flee. Back there, the Ribalds opening up on that Scotsguard line. Their 2 HP in their armor not going to be enough to save them from that flaming explosive ammunition. Over here you can see the cavalry of Venice launching assaults on the skirmish line of Russia and France. The Russians managing to hold the line here with their dismounted boyar sons. They've still got some infantry in the back as well, so I think there's oh no, those are actually just crossbow militia. So these guys not going to have fun against those mounted sergeants. If those mounted sergeants manage to get back out and reform and get another charge in there, they'll do all right against the crossbow militia. These guys definitely not meant to be in this kind of fight for too long. Kevin Ross Reivers here charging into the flank, although I think most of them are actually going to fall to the mounted sergeants. Over here in the back, you can see that Venice has a great position here with their broken lances, but unfortunately, Alexei Mazar lost a little bit of micro on those broken lances, and they are getting peppered from the rear by that Jav Cav militia from Rules. But finally, he's going to get them going, and this is going to be ugly. Let's follow them in and check this out. Boom, right into those boyar sons, going to claim many of their lives. You can really see the power of these heavy shock cav. They are going to break. I think that may have something to do with some arquebusiers or something like that opening up on them. But the front line of Rules has actually struggled more than I would have thought. The dismounted men-at-arms doing surprisingly well against the noble axemen. There goes Vislak's general. I think he was cut down by some of Alexei Mazaro's Stratiats. Probably... I'm not too sure where that happened exactly, but the Stratiats did claim the lives of Vislak's general, so that's going to be really important and have some implications for later on in the battle. Now, those broken lances still pretty healthy. I think we may see them reform, and indeed we are going to see that right now. They're going to be able to be wheeled back around and brought back to the fight. Vislak, however, relentlessly firing into those cavalry units. They're just not going to get a break. Some counterfire here from the Venetian crossbows, claiming the lives of many of those French longbowmen. is all around just looking even here. Except over on this end, you can see that some of Alexei Mazarow's forces are shaken, starting to lose out to the AP bonus of those Russian axemen. Mailed Wardens here locked in a fight with Sadovian tribesmen and the Russian axemen. On the left wing, though, I think Alexei Mazarov is really beginning to suffer. Got some arquebusiers firing point blank into those Sadovian tribesmen. That is actually going to be enough to rout them. The noble axemen, however, are going to stand strong in the face of that terrifying gunfire. Now over here, I don't know how this happened. Maybe some of the Sadovians went through here, came around, and attacked the artillery piece of Venice from the rear. But Venice now is in the process of pushing them back. Now, I think we might have missed a lot of the stuff that happened over here, but Vislac has actually been victorious against my front line. He has swept away my forces, and he's still got so many left. I just was not equipped as Portugal to go toe-to-toe in the way I did with the infantry of France. Now, I've reformed a lot of my forces here for a glorious last stand. You can see us firing straight on into those dismounted feudal knights, and I think I'm also going to start to target these arquebusiers as well because of the marked effect they have on morale. They need to die for sure. Now, the mailed Lusitanian infantry I formed up here, this is why I was really disappointed with Portugal. These guys were fine. I formed them up as a front line. Maybe they took a volley or two from the arquebusier, and then they just run and flee, and now I have no front line here to defend my skirmishers. So I have to say, Portugal as an infantry faction, I was not impressed. I would probably go with a different faction next time around. Now over here, the arquebusiers unfortunately denuded of their front line. They are going to get caught up in melee with some feudal knights, a couple units of feudal knights, and some mercenary Frankish spearmen. And it's going to be all I can do to try and hold off Vislac and inflict the maximum amount of casualties possible. My Pavy crossbows firing basically uninterrupted. Oh, there goes the Russian general. I think that Venice was capable of taking down both of those generals, and indeed they did. And I've got some reforming here, some Lusitanian infantry. I'm going to charge them into these dismounted feudal knights. Over here you can see my Portuguese knights trying to hold the line and dealing a decent amount of damage to those feudal knights. But honestly, it was like 40 feudal knights versus 20 Portuguese knights. I would have expected that my knights on the charge would have had that since they are AP. But again, they lost out. So Portugal, the infantry, not so keen on it. Mailed Lusitanian infantry going to charge right into those feudal knights, and they're going to do okay. But they are losing actually quite badly to them, even though they've got double the numbers and we're able to envelop them. In the backyard, got another unit firing unrelentingly into those feudal knights, trying to leverage every advantage still remaining to me. But so far, things are just really looking ugly. Vislac has destroyed my my musketeers, my arquebusier, whatever was there, and he's now beginning to get into my Pavy crossbows, overwhelming this tiny isolated pocket of skirmishers. In the back, I got my Pavy crossbows firing endlessly into those mercenary Frankish spearmen, doing a decent amount of damage, but they are eventually going to get caught up as well. And now these guys over here, broken, fighting to the death with the presence of French troops behind them and in front of them. I'm going to bug out with my general and try and cut my losses as best I can. Over here, my Lusitanian infantry is still fighting hard against the dismounted feudal knights. They've only really inflicted light casualties on these remaining units, and now my Portuguese knights beginning to flee is actually going to scare my poor Lusitanian infantry, and they are now beginning to waver, although their morale has started to come back a little bit. They are not going to be able to last for too much longer. So this is basically the last stand of my forces. Vislac has broken me well and truly. Although I wanted to mention over here, we had a bit of a sally forth from rules. I was able to shut it down with my my 2 units of gunpowder units. So we did kill quite a lot of Dragina there as well, which is why that unit is missing. Now, over here, I think they got skirmished down by some of the crossbows as well, so those Dragina just ended up getting isolated and eventually destroyed. Now, over on this end, rules has not won this as decisively as I would have expected from that Russian lineup, given the amount of heavy infantry that Alexei had at his disposal. Now, these dismounted men-at-arms putting up a good fight here against the noble axemen, but the noble axemen are slowly but surely managing to wrap around these guys. And at this point, we were thinking that we were pretty well boned. However, with the loss of Rules as general, things could turn around. These male wardens now charging hard into the rear of these noble axemen, going to get a beautiful charge off, take down quite a lot of those heavily armored elite axemen. And they're now shaken too, so this could be a serious problem. In the back here, you can see Rules coming in with his Javcap militia, possibly looking to get a nice hammer and anvil strike here. But these mercenary Italian spearmen standing in their way, they're going to massacre those Javcav, who are going to try and disengage almost immediately. But because of the high weight of these guys, they're not actually able to push through, and quite a lot of them, at least half the unit there, at the very least, is going to get poked to death by those Italian spears. And that Javcav, I don't think we're going to see them come back. I think that's about all that they could take, losing half the unit in a few seconds. Now, over on this end, you can see all of my Portuguese forces running away. However, I am still left with my sexy general's bodyguard unit, who has not taken any additional casualties from the 4 that I lost early on in the game. So they're still very much able to play a part in this battle. And I'm going to move them over and try and support my ally as best as I can. And what do we got over here? It looks like the Schlechte bodyguard, all the remains of them, fighting against these Italian spearmen. The Italian spearmen holding them down, managing to surround these guys, and slowly but surely defeat those elite infantry. Now over on this end, Rules' forces still surrounded. They are beginning to waver. So if you look over here, I got my general's bodyguard. I think this is going to be all she wrote for those Russian axemen. I'm going to send my general's bodyguard down into them, and they were now shaken, but with the presence of my cavalry charging into their flank, these guys are actually going to break, and that is a significant amount of lost infantry there for Rules. Now, over on this end, I can see the dismounted Boyar sons trying to be a bit of a pain here, targeting Alexei's general's bodyguard, so I'm going to charge into them as well with my general's bodyguard, try and silence them, and inflict some light casualties on them as well. You can see my general's bodyguard there using a very strange animation with their spear, just bludgeoning people about the head with the iron tip. I think it's funny, even if it's a little bit odd. So Rules has lost pretty well, I think, all of his remaining infantry lineup. Over here, the Boyar son's going to get caught. So double simultaneous charges from either side by the Stratiots and my general's bodyguard coming in from the rear. That's going to hold them down long enough for those mailed wardens to get in there and finish the job. And those dismounted Boyar sons have suffered grievously in their retreat away from the rout here that saw the end of so many of the noble axemen. And my general's bodyguard charging back in there, trying to keep these guys pinned and allow my ally to catch up with them. I am going to lose one more of my general's bodyguard there, leaving me with a meager 6. And now this is where it starts to get real ugly. You can see Vislak, fresh from his victory over my Portuguese forces, is going to move in with everything that remains to him. Now, bear in mind, he doesn't have his general either, but he does have a lot of infantry, so that's a big problem. I think he's got about, like, 80 or so feudal knights or something on this side, maybe about 60 is a little bit more accurate, some 35 Flemish pikemen, and over on this side, yet more infantry. We got some 37 feudal knights there, 61 Frankish spearmen, and that is so much infantry. Although we did manage to inflict some pretty heavy casualties on his horsemen, and I think Alexei Mazar actually sent some cavalry over there to help me out with that as well. So we managed to cripple the horse and the skirmish wing of Vislak's army and deal some serious damage to his infantry as well, although he does still have a pretty overwhelming advantage here in terms of men and resources. Now over on this end, you can see the mercenary Italian spearmen being routed, and I think some of the feudal knights here are going to begin to rout as well, thanks to a charge from the rear from my general's bodyguard and some of Alexei Mazaro's still remaining cavalrymen. You can see his general's bodyguard over there. I think he's also got 1 or 2 Stratiots left, maybe. Now over on this end, the feudal knights slowly but surely marching forward. There's actually a unit of mercenary Javs here as well, and I think that they're trying to target some of Alexei's skirmishers. There's a little bit of crossbow fire going into these guys, and now there's Stratiot moving in as well. Maybe trying to put up some like glorious last stand to try and hold these guys down for as long as possible. That thing's going to fly out of there very, very quick, post-haste. Meanwhile, the general is going to come in on the flank and inflict some damage on these guys. And look at that. They are shaken. They do not like this. Now, over on this end, you can see that we've managed to rout a huge number of Vislak's army. I'm going to chase them down with my general's bodyguard, trying to make sure that they do not come back from routing, or at the very least, inflict heavy, heavy casualties on these guys. And in the event that they do come back, they will not be quite so strong as they were before. So we're seeing a little bit of reforming here. Dismount the feudal knights. They are going to come back, so I'm going to have to pull my general's bodyguard out of there as quickly as possible. Now, over here, Vislak's forces still able to fight, but they're not even in combat yet, and they're already shaken, so that does not bode well for them, especially while they're taking some crossbow fire from 7 Venetian crossbowmen. Now, that is decisive at this point in the battle. Vislak's going to send over his mercenary javelinmen to try and deal with them, but I think the damage has already been done. Although, when it looked like we had this in the bag, Alexei unfortunately lost his general. Now, his forces, mailed wardens, and the 49 dismounted men-at-arms are going to charge into these dismounted field knights. I'm going to come in with my bodyguard to try and support him. And we're going to rout Vislak's forces yet again. But more of them have reformed. You can see some of these wavering troops here have begun to move forward. But they're actually beginning to, I think they're starting to rout. I think that's because of these dismounted feudal knights right here running away right through that unit. It is going to dispirit them a little bit. So both of these guys shaken, this front line here wavering. Ooh, it's going to be real close. I don't think that they have the units left at this point to overcome 49 of these dismounted men-at-arms. So somehow, some way, we've managed to pull back victory from the jaws of defeat. Although I have to say, it is mostly due to myself. No, I'm just kidding. It was totally Alexei Mazzaro. But without him, we would definitely have lost this battle. He shows that he knows really what he's doing when he plays this game, this mod that he has actually created. I'm going to move over with my general's bodyguard, take down as many of these mercenary Frankish spearmen as possible. Again, the plan is to try and keep these guys from reforming and coming back. Now, one of the things that has happened is that we beat Vislak's forces, ping-pong to the other sides, and then drive them back over there. We have not been able to rout them in their entirety, and which is why this battle is still going on the way it has been. So I'm going to make sure these guys come back. Meanwhile, my ally, or don't come back, meanwhile my ally is going to move in and try and deal with those Flemish pikemen, although they were wavering a moment ago, so that could have been real ugly. But these two troops charging into these unprotected and outnumbered Flemish pikemen at the same time, that is going to cause a rout pretty well quickly. You can already see them beginning to waver. It's my general's bodyguard that was moving in to help them. I thought better of it because they were pikemen. Flemish pike's going to rout. And in the back here, I think that's pretty well it. I don't think any of Vislak's forces are still around. His entire army is routed, so that is going to be the end of them. What was very, very close. Now, it says 77 to 91, but honestly, at the end there, it was 96% to 96. So very close here. Alexei Mazzaro getting nearly double my kills. Definitely the MVP in this battle. Rules, it seemed like he really struggled against those forces of Alexei Mazzaro. I think it was just all that HP that he was able to throw at those noble axemen, which is what kept Alexei Mazzaro's forces in the game for so long. And I think we probably didn't see all the cavalry charges, but I am almost 100% positive that Alexei Mazzaro's cavalry played a decisive role in that battle. Vislak got a nice amount of kills, completely destroyed my army, cleaned my clock, and at the same time was fighting on both fronts. So it was very micro-intensive for all of us, but for especially Vislak, I think, because he was fighting basically two separate battles simultaneously. Myself, I did all right. My general at the end there really did well for themselves, 80 kills, but that's not really including the amount of morale damage that I was able to inflict, which was important in our come-from-behind victory here. So I think this mod has a lot of potential for a really competitive multiplayer scene, and I don't really see too many people talking about it. So what I'm going to do, I think I've mentioned this already, but I'm going to tell you again. I'm going to put a link for it down in the description. If you guys are interested in getting in on some battles with myself or Alexei Mazzaro or for with the rest of the community, a lot of them play Reforged as well. I'm sure you recognize Vislak and Rules from some of the other replays that I've done. So there's a lot of overlap in the communities there. So if you're looking for just a new mod to play when you're not doing Reforged or when you're not doing DAC or anything else that you do in your spare time, I recommend that you come and check this out because there's a really active multiplayer scene for it. It's smaller, but people are always doing games. There's always new replays being posted. There's an RP that's starting up. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on for it, so I recommend that you go and check it out. But in any case, that's enough for the advertisement. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of our replay battles, and I will see you in the next one. As for what the next one is going to be, probably some Let's Plays. I said that I was going to do more Let's Plays. I think at the end, after this battle, I mean at the end of our Techless campaign, the last video there, which I intend to follow up on. So it's going to be some 4th Age, because we haven't done that for a while. So we're going to get 2 episodes of 4th Age simultaneously. Not simultaneously, well, sequentially. That's what I want. It'd be weird if it was simultaneously. I mean, they come out in specific order for a reason. And then it's going to be some more of our Techless. I want to try and finish our Techless campaign as soon as possible because there is the hotfix patch that is now out for Mortal Empires, which is really what I was waiting for when I first announced my my intention to play Mortal Empires. I didn't want to start a campaign and then have there be a patch and then have that campaign crash or whatever in like a week or two. But in any case, I will see you guys next time, and yeah, take care for now. Bye-bye!